Hey, welcome back to Dogtography. I'm so excited for today's episode. It's the episode I wish I had when I was back kind of getting started in amateur photography. So today we're going to cover my secrets for how to use a manual camera. So whether it's a DSLR or a mirrorless or you have a compact camera, if you can adjust the exposure settings on your camera, I'm going to share with you my dog photography secrets on how to unlock those settings quickly and easily without having to know numbers, getting stressed, or just feeling intimidated by it in general. Today's episode is for you. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Andrea Fleury and welcome to Dogtography. My channel is all about how to take better images of your dog and how to create some really super fun memories. I walk you through different tips and tutorials and techniques. I sometimes show you behind the scenes of my professional career as a dog photographer, all while just trying to have some fun and enjoy time with our dogs. So if you're anything like me, a creative person who just wants to take beautiful images, I found it very easy to get overwhelmed by settings and numbers and dials and switches and buttons, and knowing that there was a combination of things that I had to program in order to take one picture. So that was enough to make me just want to put it on auto mode and take images that way. But then I kind of felt like I wasn't using my camera the way that I should be, and then I just kind of felt like a fraud, and I put it back in my camera bag and put it on a shelf, and I never used it again. That was my original Canon Rebel that came out, I don't know, 15 some odd years ago. And it wasn't until about 3 years ago did I decide that I was going to finally conquer manual exposure on a camera. I'd spent many years convinced that I was too stupid to actually figure it out. But I have some secrets for you today so you don't have to spend your time thinking that, because it's totally not true. It is very achievable. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's simple. The way I'm going to show you today and teach you with my 3 secrets that I have, you're going to be taking pictures by the end of this episode without stress, I promise you. So first, before we get into my tips, we need to kind of understand the basics of exposure. Exposure is what's happening when your camera, say it's on automatic mode, is figuring out all the settings to read the light in the scene to develop an image. So it's doing it automatically. It's using all of its computer settings and stuff inside to figure that out. Today, we're going to learn how to unlock those settings so that you can set them the way you want them. Now, why would you ever want to do that? Why do you want to take it off of auto and put yourself through all this stress of trying to figure out manual settings? Well, the biggest reason I can think of is because it gives you complete control over your imagery. When you leave it on auto, you are essentially letting a computer decide how to creatively expose your photograph. So you're going to quickly learn, when you start controlling the settings yourself, you can achieve different effects. You can enhance, in my opinion, the storytelling of your image. You can give it different lights and shadows. You can give it a completely different feel. I am not shitting you when I tell you that an image taken on an automatic setting is a dead giveaway for it looking more amateur and more like cell phone-like. When you start digging deep into the settings and you know what you're doing, you're going to develop imagery that looks more professional. It looks more enhanced. It looks more intentional, because you are intentionally setting the settings in a way that is going to get you the image that you want to create. So when it comes to exposure, there are 3 things that you need to adjust and set in your camera. You've maybe heard of the exposure triangle. It is ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Those are the 3 variables that allow the camera to manipulate the light that is coming in through the lens. And I'm going to give you my secrets for how to tweak those. But let's go over those quickly so that you understand what they are. So the first one is shutter speed. So shutter speed is essentially how quickly the opening on your lens is opening and closing. okay? And that determines how much light is being let in through the lens. So a slower shutter speed is gonna let in more light than a faster shutter speed. Now, the quickness or slowness of your shutter also dictates other things that are gonna happen with your image. So for instance, you're outside, and this is mostly tips, by the way, for outdoor photography where there is lots of available light. Indoor photography is kind of different because it's a lot darker and it's harder to control the lighting. So my suggestions today are more for outdoor scenarios. But let's say that you're outdoors and it's a bright sunny day. The amount of light that needs to come into your camera is a lot less than what your camera would need if it was darker outside, dusk, that kind of thing. So you'd want a faster shutter speed if it's brighter outside, or a slower shutter speed if it's darker outside. Again, it's all just varying how much light is being let into the camera. So the next one is aperture. An aperture is essentially a bunch of blades inside the lens that constrict or expand, much like the pupil in your eye. It controls, again, how much light is coming into the camera. So when aperture is wide open and it's essentially letting in as much light as it can, the lens can only focus within a certain distance, so it can only see. So think about your vision at nighttime. Your pupils get really big to try and let in as much light as it can, but you can only see like a foot or so in front of you, right? So when you constrict the aperture, think again of like your eyes in the bright sun, and they go like really, really small, right? But you can see to like infinity almost, right? Like you can see way, way, way in front of you. So that is exactly what happens with the aperture on a lens. So when I say shoot wide open, that means as open as possible. That translates to the lowest f-stop number on your camera. And we're gonna get into all of that in a minute, but this is why it starts to get confusing. I don't know how or why people set up cameras and the numbers that are associated with it, but the smallest number means the biggest opening. And I don't know why that is. I feel like that should be totally reversed, and it's like the biggest number is the biggest opening, but that's just not how it goes, unfortunately. But that is essentially what aperture is. So it controls how much light, again, is let into the camera through the opening in the lens. So the last setting to talk about is ISO. And ISO is another contributor to light. On a digital camera, it is a digital form of enhancing the light. Now, I'm not going to totally nerd out on ISO. If you want to look it up yourself, there's all kinds of like definitions and reasons, and people call it all kinds of things, from like fake light to digital light to all kinds of whatever. I don't even know. Not going to get into it, but essentially when you increase the ISO, you are making, back in the day, you were making film more sensitive to light. In a digital camera, you are making the sensor in the camera more sensitive to light, or you are adding digital light essentially. So when you turn it up, you're adding digital boost to that image. Which sounds great and all. You're like, well, why don't we just change ISO all day long? Like, why do we have to have all of these things? Well, the more ISO you introduce to an image, the grainier it looks, because the more artificial it is. It's the camera adding digital light to it. So it starts to get kind of pixely and kind of grainy. And at a certain point, and every camera has a different threshold of how much ISO you can crank on it before it starts to really distort the picture quality. But it does come in handy when you need an extra little boost in lower light situations. So secret number one is about aperture. The great thing about being a dog photographer, which I'm assuming you are, I am assuming because you're here on this channel watching these videos, is that you are taking photos of dogs. You already know what your subject is. So it's not like you're picking up a camera for the first time and you're going, do I want to take pictures of landscapes, weddings, children, pets, food, whatever. Like, knowing what your subject matter is going to help out a lot. So because I know that you're going to be photographing a dog, I immediately have one suggestion and one suggestion only for your aperture setting. you ready? Just keep it wide open. Shoot wide open all the time. So what that's going to mean is you are going to adjust your f-stop number to the lowest setting you can possibly set it to. Now, every lens is different. So whatever lens you have with your camera, you might see f2.8, f5.6, f4.0, whatever the lowest number is, leave it on that and never change it. Just leave it. For the purposes of practicing, there's no reason to change it. If you are photographing one dog, this is the ultimate setting you want to leave it on. Now, why? So, first of all, you're shooting wide open. So your lens is letting in as much light as it possibly can. Remember what that also means. It is lessening how far that lens can see. It means that you are more likely to now get like the creamy, dreamy looking backgrounds, which is exactly what you want to have in images that look more creative and artistic and have storytelling and are different than what a cell phone can take. That creamy, dreamy background, or more so than what an automatic setting is going to take, is what you want. So leave it wide open, as they call it, which is the lowest f-stop number that you can have on your camera. Okay, so secret number 2 is all about shutter speed. So shutter speed, if you remember, is how quickly the lens is opening and closing to let in light. So there's 2 scenarios I'm going to present here. Scenario number 1 is your dog is sitting still or relatively still. It's posed maybe up on a tree stump or on a log or on a chair or looking out the window. In other words, they're not moving around, okay? So when a dog is sitting still, there's still a little bit of movement. Like they're pets, they're animals. They don't know, they're not like people where they can like hold their breath and sit really still and don't move, just blink. They're not like that. So you have to have a shutter speed on your camera that removes what is called motion blur. So because we are all vibrating and moving and breathing, there is a certain amount of motion all bodies kind of have, pets even more so though than humans, that we have to account for in our shutter speed. So the faster the shutter, the easier it is for also to cut out motion blur. So suggestion number 1 is to set your shutter to 1/500th of a second. That is fast enough to cut through motion blur under most circumstances. Set your camera to that and then set your aperture as wide open as it can, okay? Now, there are circumstances in which you would adjust your shutter speed. So those circumstances are if you're outside and it is like really bright and sunny outside and you're noticing, okay, Andrea, I've got my aperture set as low as it'll go, so it's wide open. I've now set my shutter speed to 1/500th of a second and I'm still noticing that my image is way too bright, then turn the shutter speed up. So when you turn the shutter speed up, it's going to change quickly how fast the shutter is opening and closing, so therefore it will let in less light the higher you crank it up. So you'll start to notice that your images will become a little darker because it's letting in less light. But always, always, always start at 1/500th of a second and just see, and you will learn over time. This comes with practice. You will be able to eventually look at the available light in your scene and you will just know how fast your shutter will have to be. That only comes with practice, but for a starting point, just start at 1/500th of a second and you're gonna be good to go. Now, if you're photographing action, say your dog's running around, it has a toy, it's walking, that's still action. It's in the water, it's licking itself and doing something cute. Any movement, the camera is going to try and freeze that movement. But you know how fast pets can move, right? So the camera has to be set in a way to allow it to capture a split second in time and to make sure it's sharp and crisp and in focus. So my recommendation for a shutter speed when photographing action is a minimum of 1/1250th of a second. So that's 1/1250 of a second. And that should give you some nice crispy looking action shots. I intentionally set up action. So if you're like, well, Andrea, I don't know when my dog's gonna start running. I don't know when he's gonna move. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, I know. Well, join the club. This is part of the unpredictability of pets. And so you're like, yes, maybe you miss a shot or two, but you will know what buttons on the back of your camera control shutter speed. You'll know how to crank it up to that setting, and then you can go about shooting your action. That's just the nature of manual settings on a camera, is you have to be able to kind of adjust them on the fly, relatively speaking. So don't worry about it. That kind of speed and accuracy, even I can't tell you half of what the buttons do on the back of my camera, but my thumb knows, and it just goes to the right ones when I need it to. It will become like muscle memory over time, so don't stress about that. But those are my 2 recommendations for where to start with shutter speed. And I suggest, if your subject is sitting still, like our puppy is here, that you want to keep it at 1/500th of a second to start with, minimum. So don't have it lower than that. So that is your minimum shutter speed. Now, as you can see, when I turn my shutter up, so it's essentially going to be faster, you can see that my image is getting darker. So it's letting in less light. Now, if you're like looking at this lighting scenario here and you're like, wow, that looks really dark, I need to compensate for something here. You know that we need to keep it at this setting for action. You know we're going to keep it as wide open, or this number as low as possible for the aperture. So that then leaves your ISO setting as your variable. So I'm going to start to turn up my ISO, and you can see that my image is getting brighter. It's the only thing that I have left to control or to manipulate on here, because these settings are set the way that we know we need them to be. So last but not least is ISO. So ISO is, again, how much extra boost your camera is giving your exposure to make it lighter or brighter. Start at ISO 100. So that is the least amount of ISO most cameras add into a picture. Okay, so you have your aperture set at the lowest it can possibly be, which is f, whatever your lens will accommodate. Hopefully it's like 2.8 or 4 point something. Hopefully not too much higher than that, but whatever the lowest it is, it is. And then you've set your shutter speed to 1/500th of a second with an ISO of 100. Okay, now take a look at your picture. Does it look dark? Does it look too bright? What's going on now with the exposure? Now I can start to help you. So if the exposure is looking a little dark and you want to add a little boost, turn that ISO up. Try ISO 200, 300. You could probably safely go up to ISO 800 and not suffer from too much grain, too much distortion in the image. Most cameras can handle about 800 ISO. Try that, see if that helps. Take a picture and look at it. If again, you're like, it's still if it's too dark, then you need to add light into your scene by like external lights. If the ISO is cranked to 800 and it's still too dark, you're probably shooting in a time of day that is like almost nighttime. And that, unless you have a flash or anything like that, you're not gonna get a suitable image. Now, if it's daytime, say it's bright outside, your ISO is probably gonna stay at 100. You're probably not gonna need that variable at all. So now we've really reduced how complicated this has to be. You keep your ISO at 100, you keep your aperture as wide open as possible. Your only variable now is shutter speed. So if you're looking at your exposure and you're going, oh my gosh, this is way too bright, increase your shutter, make it faster. Make it let in less light, and then you will notice that your exposure starts to darken, remember? So it's really simple in how these things work, but you really don't get to know exactly what to set your settings at until you just start to practice and you read the light around you. So just remember, photography is all about light coming in through the lens, or like light coming in through your eyes. It works much of the same way, and you will start to be able to read the light around you and just know what your camera needs. So there you have it. I hope that those secrets and those tips have kind of taken away some of the mystery of all the numbers and the different exposure settings and everything that's needed on a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. Believe it or not, your cell phone also has manual controls. So you don't always need a camera like this to use manual settings in photography. There's apps you can download on your phone. Now, granted, the lenses on a cell phone are significantly limited as opposed to the lenses that you can buy for like a DSLR or a mirrorless type camera like mine. This is where the fun in photography and being able to get creative comes in. It's all the variables that are present with a camera like this. The possibilities are endless. I will be honest with you, and I will tell you, cell phones, as great as the technology has become, they're still significantly limited in what they can do. So I want to encourage you and inspire you to try upgrading to a camera like this if you think that it's something that you would like to try. If you want to take your images to the next level, if you want to grow your creative skills, if you want to explore more about photography and storytelling, then I encourage you to invest in a camera like this. If you are looking for camera recommendations or more feedback to do with, lenses, what type of lenses I use for dog photography, anything like that, drop your questions down in the comments below. Be really specific about it. Ask me specific questions and I will be able to then craft better answers for you in another episode if you want to follow up to this one. Please go out and try. Get that camera out of the bag and start adjusting your settings and see what you can create. Just go out and play. You won't regret it. It won't take you long. I promise you. You can do this. If I can do it, you can do it. All right. Tag me on Instagram or Facebook at dogphotography.ca and let me know how your experience is going. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and I will see you next Saturday. Bye for now.